What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It is Tuesday night, and Donovan Mitchell has signed his extension with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kenny Atkinson has been introduced as the team's next head coach, and the big question in Cleveland now is, we've seen the first two dominoes of the offseason fall. What will be the next? And I have a special guest joining me tonight to help unpack all of that coming up on this edition of the Ultimate Cavaliers Show. What's up, guys? Mikey McNuggets, as always. Jason Lloyd is busy tonight, and when Jason's not here, we try to bring on another guest, and this is a guy I've been waiting to talk Cavs basketball with for a while. It is Real Cavs Fans from Real Cavs Fans, where you can find all of your Cavs. It's a fan forum, and I'm going to just give you the floor real quick, but how would you describe what you guys do over at Real Cavs Fans?
We live and bleed wine and gold. So if you want to talk, you want to learn, you want to chop it up with all your fellow Cavalier fans from across the world, come see us.
They have some great forums, some great deep dives. They're up on top of the latest free agency news, trade rumors. They do a great job of transcribing interviews from national media members throughout any TV or radio hit they're on talking about Cleveland. So definitely a asset for any Cavs fan to consider becoming a member of and following along on social media. But enough with the intros. We had breaking news this morning, and right before 10 o'clock, Woj tweeted out that Donovan Mitchell had signed an extension to stay here in Cleveland for 2 years on top of the current year he had left, with a player option for 2027, 2028. I'm going to break some news here and tell you he will decline that player option and hit free agency in 2027, 2028, as he should, because at that point he would be eligible for the 10-year service max boost and up to $350 million. I think we all expected this to happen, but now that it's officially official, how crucial and how important was this for the Cavs organization to get a signature from a star-level player of Donovan's caliber to signify that this city, this team, and this organization is ready to compete with the best and the best for the next few years moving forward?
I think it speaks in today's day and age that situation matters more than anything else. So Donovan saw the situation here and saw it as his best situation to progress not only financially but competitively. We're in an offseason where we just saw Paul George leave the Clippers to go to a different situation. Granted, there's some financial considerations there, but when all Cleveland heard was market, going to LA, going to Miami, Donovan remained here and signed an extension here. Doesn't mean he finishes it here, but they have the opportunity to continue on this path they've built thus far.
I think it's kind of funny that in hindsight, maybe the best thing that ever happened to the Cavs in terms of keeping Donovan Mitchell here long-term was Jalen Brunson emerging into a star against them in the playoffs last season, because that was obviously the rumored destination for Donovan. He has his ties to New York. But the Brunson-Mitchell backcourt and pairing never made sense whatsoever. And when Brunson became the guy in New York, that kind of took the Knicks off the table in terms of realistic suitors for Donovan Mitchell. And when you looked at the rest of the teams who could potentially pursue Donovan, for lack of a better word, there simply was no better basketball fit than here in Cleveland, alongside Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, the core four, and hopefully Kenny Atkinson can unlock the rest of that. But in the moment, that Knicks loss was debilitating and demoralizing, for lack of a better word. But in hindsight, I kind of think that was the moment where Donovan was like, this Cleveland situation may actually be my best bet to max out my abilities as a player and to max out my wallet as a investor, for lack of a better word.
And we've seen in today's day and age, too, that stars are also cognizant of if they shift situations, what does that mean for the team they're going to? So just because he's traded to Miami or New York, LA, whatever it may be, there's talent going back. When we heard with Paul George, the Zach Lowe podcast, they kind of talked about that as well. If he's going to Golden State, who is going from Golden State to go to LA that could impact their chances? So it's more than just where am I going next? What does that situation look like? How competitive can I be? So there's a lot to consider, and ultimately the Cavs won that race for the time being.
No, it's a win-win for everybody. I tweeted this out earlier, but from Donovan's standpoint, he gets a contract extension that pays him the max for the next 3 years, or 2 years really, and gets a chance to cash out big time when he hits his 10th service year by re-entering free agency in what should still be the prime of his career. From the Cavs, you and I have talked back and forth on their timeline and the way they've approached the last 2 years since acquiring Donovan Mitchell, and this now gives them, at least in theory, a concrete deadline of we have to put together a contender. Now it is time to push all our chips in on the table. We know how long we have Donovan under contract in Cleveland, and he obviously can request a trade or whatnot, but I'm not even thinking those terms right now. You know your timeline. And when you know your timeline, you can make moves accordingly. And it was always a bit of a give and take from Koby Altman in the front office on how aggressive should we be, knowing on the back end if Donovan leaves, we can't push all our chips in because then we're stuck with nothing. Well, now you know he's here and he's committed to you. I think you have to make the equal commitment back to Donovan to put a championship contending roster around him.
Signing the extension doesn't finish the job. Winning does. That is how this is going to be judged. So Koby did his job up to this point. Now he's trying to earn that next extension and earn his job moving forward, because ultimately Donovan's given them a 2-year window.
Yeah.
They have 2 years to compete or else he can go elsewhere. And we're going to be in the same discussion we had all this offseason with the player option being where it's at. So it's not to put a damper on things, but the feet are to your feet to the fire now. As far as how you build this out. And this offseason was all about realignment. Can you realign to where you're going forward? Which pathway are you taking? Are you going to rebuild or are you going with Donovan? So now that your decision is there with Donovan, we've seen the coach kind of fall in line next with how they want to pursue this next window.
And it's interesting because Donovan is a guy, and I'm not sure exactly where you rank him, but he's probably between 10 and 15 in the league. Is that a fair assessment? He's not in that top echelon with Jokic and Giannis, but he's certainly an all-NBA first or second team caliber guard. That's a fair assessment, right?
Yeah, ESPN and Ringer had him about 15 and 20 here.
Perfect. So somewhere in that range of an absolute star, but not the top tier superstar. And when you look at the last handful of NBA champions, and really throughout the history of the league, it's been the super duper stars who produce championships. And the question of whether Donovan can be the best player on a championship team still has to be answered. He has had some playoff success, but not the playoff success you would hope from a player of his caliber. And it's not all Donovan by any means, but that's just the reality of the teams he's been on. So how do you make a team and put a team around Donovan to not only accentuate his best skills, but also put him in a position where it's not all on his shoulders to have to carry through the playoffs? And this is where Koby's going to earn his money. And I think what you said a second ago, as far as the extension was the first part of Koby Altman's job being complete. The next part is assembling a roster, team, coaching staff, organizational foundation to accentuate and build that up to the next level. And now is what Koby Altman, that is exactly what he's tasked at doing over the next few months. And we'll talk about what's the next domino moves in a bit here, but they don't have a ton of pieces that make a ton of sense elsewhere, at least not that are more valuable to Team X as opposed to they are to Cleveland.
Does Kyle Kuzma and Brandon Ingram make more sense than Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen? I mean, you have to look at where they go next and what's available. You can say make a move, but a move has to be available to you that makes sense not only now but moving forward. Those are important players. I mean, I know you talked about Donovan Mitchell. Prior to this year, ESPN had all 4 Cavalier core 4 in the top 50. The Ringer, which was updated June 20th, had them all 4 in the top 55. So you're not getting better if you're dealing those off for pieces and parts. How you build out, Kenny Atkinson was the first piece. Second piece is what other additions can you add to better balance out the roster that you have, because there is some imbalance there. You know, we've talked about a lot Koby being in talent acquisition mode. Now it's about fit. We've seen New York really go for fit. We've seen OKC really focus on fit here recently. So how do you best fit around your pillar being Mitchell and then your secondary pillar being Mobley? Those are the key questions, and we'll see how they feel about Allen and Garland moving forward. When you look at the rest of the East, too, all the best teams, at least on paper, you have Boston with Tatum and Brown on the wing. You have the Knicks now with Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. You have Philadelphia acquiring Paul George. You have Indiana technically had Siakam. And you look at Miami with Jimmy Butler. Like, there's a lot of bigger wings in the Eastern Conference that you're going to have to get through if you want to make a deep run in the playoffs. The Magic have like 43 different players who are 6'7", 9, who can't necessarily shoot, but are athletic mismatches just in terms of their physical stature. And that's still the one
kind of missing hole on the Cavs roster is they don't have that prototypical big wing to match up with some of those guys. But I do think with Atkinson, and we're going to talk about some impressions from his opening presser in a sec, I do think there are advantages the Cavs have with some of the guys they currently have on the roster in Garland and Evan and Jarrett and obviously Donovan that can counteract size. And it'll be interesting to see how Atkinson plans to and approaches a philosophy and scheme to maybe speed, quickness, and movement to counteract the lack of length on the perimeter. And we know the bigs are big, but we're talking about real wings here who can play on the perimeter and create from the wing. As good as Strus is, as good as LeVert can be in stretches, like those guys aren't of the level of the Tatums, the Browns, the Ingrams, the Siakams, the best of the best in the East. And that's still the one piece of the puzzle I feel like Koby Altman and this team has to kind of figure out before the start of next season.
And we're not getting that right now. With what's out there via trade or via free agency, that's not fair to expect that. But there has to be some improvement, to your point, with some of those players that they're going to be up against. And the problem has been the last two playoffs is they can't even find guys who can consistently be on the floor, either strong enough defensively or strong enough offensively, doing things both ways. We think back to last year with New York. Chetty was able to hit some shots, but he couldn't defend anyone. Okoro was out there able to defend folks, but he couldn't really hit enough shots to be a consistent threat and have defenses guard him. So it's even just the aspect of, can you have someone defend well enough and shoot well enough at the same time? So we're not needing a top-tier talent. Obviously, that'd be great, but you just need someone capable and competent to consistently play on both ends. And Strus did that in stretches, but you need more than just Max Strus. Dean Wade's injury really hurt a lot. Honestly, he'd be the perfect wing for the starting lineup, but with his health last 2 years, it's really hard to count on him. So where they go next is finding someone of size and is able to consistently play on both ends. And it doesn't have to be a world beater, just has to be someone who gets the job done.
That's the hardest position of basketball to find. And when we've looked through 3,821 trades this offseason just to fill content on UCSS, which, by the way, I love making up silly trades. Some I think are a lot more realistic, at least on paper, than others. Some we throw out there just because it's fun to talk about trades and why a team would say no and not. Teams aren't just giving up these players and these wings particularly, especially the ones who can create. And as much as, we want to put together the salary packages that match, and I like George Niang as a person, great dude. There's a reason he's sprinkled into every trade, and 98.5% of them, the other team saying no. Like, we all saw with our own eyes what happened to George Niang in the postseason this year, and he had moments throughout the regular season, but why would another team want to take on that with his contract when they're giving up a playmaking wing? It's hard and it's extremely difficult to find one. That's why I like the draft gamble on a guy like Jalen Tyson, who has at least some playmaking upside from that 2-3 position. He may not be 6'8", 6'9", like some of the guys we mentioned earlier, but at least he brings that level of theoretical production on the outside. And I still think this Cavs roster has holes to fill. They should, and should's a key word, have the mid-level exception, almost the full mid-level exception to use on a free agent. And they have a couple different options out there that I think make sense that we'll get to in a sec. But overall, in terms of Donovan re-signing today, it is a win for the Cavs. It is not over, but it is a win. They have not won the war. It's just a battle. But it is a major battle victory, and I think a sign moving forward that, A, you can acquire a star in a mid-major market and prove and put the right situation around him to where he will resign, and it's not just a 2-year rental. And then B, this team should compete. It's not going to be easy because the East is a gauntlet this year. Some other teams have gotten significantly better earlier this offseason. But this is a team that is at least putting themselves in the conversation to compete with Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Milwaukee and Indiana in the Eastern Conference for the next 2 years. Because if not, then we'll come back and look at this exact conversation at 7:44 on July 2nd and say, wow, how the tables turned, and that turned into an absolute catastrophe.
And I would just add, too, I think it's increasingly important in this new CBA age where it's increasing parity and decreasing super teams that sometimes you just need to be good enough, and that can be good enough and maybe get some luck. So, with Dallas last year, nobody saw them going to the finals. They happened to get on the right hot streak, make the right moves. Obviously, having Kyrie and Luka helps, but It's about being available at the time when opportunities present themselves. So I know everyone kind of compares the Cavs. Are you going to be better than the Raptors or the Hawks of years past? Those were damn good teams. They just happen to face one of the best players in the history of the league. Like, that at least gives you an opportunity to break through. And sometimes all you need is that opportunity. So all the Cavs continue to do is be as good as they can. And sometimes things will break right, and we'll see where they go.
And last thing, we'll take a break and we'll come back and talk a little Kenny Atkinson. Role players are great, especially in the playoffs. You need guys to step up and make shots, but stars win you series, as we saw in the Dallas series throughout the Western Conference. It was Luka and Kyrie putting the team on the back. And then they got to the finals, and the role players who made timely shots against OKC and Minnesota and the Clippers went completely MIA, and their offense cratered. So having Donovan locked in is one of at least two. I think you need two. You don't necessarily need three anymore. At least one of the two pillars that is now locked in for the Cavs as they move forward into this next era of Cavaliers basketball. Going to take a real quick break and remind the good people out there that FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the ultimate Cleveland sports show and Major League Baseball. And when sports aren't sportsing like you want them to, you can go to FanDuel and place a bet anytime. FanDuel, you can bet on everything from single game bets to player props to parlays. If you can dream it, FanDuel can make it happen. And this summer, they're giving out boosts and bonuses daily. So make sure you guys head over to FanDuel.com/UCSS, sign up, and make FanDuel your official sportsbook of use. Moving on and moving back to some Cavs here. Kenny Atkinson was officially introduced as the Cavs head coach yesterday, and I'm going to hold my thoughts for second because I had a chance to talk to Kenny one-on-one. I was in person at the press conference, so I know how I felt being there and being able to read the room. I'm curious from your standpoint, what did you think of Kenny Atkinson's introductory press conference, how he plans to utilize this team, what he said, and whether or not he, quote-unquote, and I hate asking this question, I'm going to do it, bad job out of me, did he win the press conference in your mind?
Can somebody lose a press conference?
Yes. Real quick, you absolutely can lose it. Adam Gase with the Jets, but he had his laser taco eyes. So I think you can lose this. But
fair. No, and you did a great job in the interview, by the way. It was a great watch and kind of pulled some good tidbits out of him. But I think the thing that I took away from it more than anything was development. And we know Kenny has gotten the label as development coach, which typically has been means you can't take him to the next level. But his job is to come in and develop Evan Mobley to a better offensive player. His job is to develop Mitchell and Garland further. His job is to develop Garland individually. If he can develop those individual parts and formulate them into a better team, this team will have more success. The reason why Mitchell and Garland didn't work last year wasn't because they didn't fit. It's because Garland individually regressed. It wasn't a knock between the two. It was because Garland didn't achieve the levels he had the previous 2 years. So his job moving forward is, how do I create a team that's going to be cohesive enough offensively to get me the production that I want? Looking back at the playoffs, looking at some stats, the Mobley and Allen pairing were 92nd and 91st percentile the last two playoffs. Garland and Mitchell were 78th and 55th percentile defensively. So not as elite, but good enough. Do you want to know what those pairings were offensively? 15th and 22nd for Garland and Mitchell, 20th and 8th for Mobley and Allen. So the defense has been good enough. It's the offense, and hearing him talk about some of the things he learned from Golden State, but also taking from the pace and space of D'Antoni and Bud previously with Atlanta, it's certainly encouraging, as well as the adaptability and flexibility of his scheme, where he's not a systems player, he's a player's player and adapting to what they do best to get the best out of them.
I truly believe he's going to take little pieces of what each player does and kind of create a playbook here, for lack of a better word. Maybe it's called philosophy, but take little bits and pieces of what Donovan's excelled at throughout the first 7 years of his career and what he used with Draymond to Evan. I asked him that question directly, and he kind of alluded to, there's a lot of similarities in how I want to envision using Evan Mobley to how Draymond was used in Golden State. And I think Darius Garland can run a lot of the off-ball action that Steph Curry did. Now, I'm not saying he's Steph Curry by any means, but I do think some of the action that Golden State ran to get Steph some open looks is something that could be utilized to get Darius Garland open looks if he starts making shots like he did 2 and 3 seasons ago, not last year where his catch-and-shoot numbers cratered. And when they traded, the Cavs, traded for Donovan Mitchell, one of the things you heard from everybody was we believe, and our analytics show us, that Darius Garland can play off the ball. He does not need to have the ball in his hands to be a effective and efficient offensive playmaker. Last year, if he shoots like that, their numbers are wrong. But if you get back to the 2021-22 and 2022-2023 version of Darius, I do think he showed, at least in flashes, the ability to play off ball and draw defense away from the basket and create a gravitational pull that then unlocks things for everyone else. When I sat down with Kenny one-on-one, he mentioned using backside pin downs for Max Strus. The only time I could remember the Cavs running a backside pin down for anyone last year was an out-of-timeout play against Boston in Game 3 or Game 2. I forget what it was. And that was one time. And I was looking and begging for that. So I think hearing Atkinson talk about development, knowing what he's done in his past stops in terms of a developer and as a coach, and hearing him talk about what he learned from Golden State with Steve Kerr and the Clippers with Ty Lue, and understanding what he did in Brooklyn 4 years ago will not fly in Cleveland now. I just feel like he's approaching this with the right mindset. And maybe that's naive, and maybe I got fooled sitting down and speaking to him one-on-one because I liked him. He came off as a great guy. Like, I think it came off in the interview as well. But I do believe he's entering this situation with the right mindset of knowing I need to do X, Y, and Z to get the most out of this group. And if I don't, none of us are going to be here in a few years. So I better get this right on the first try. Am I looking too far into that, or did you kind of get the same impression?
No, I mean, what he spoke at the press conference has been a lot of what he's been about throughout his career. So he talked about, gathering all the information he possibly could have. He talked about being analytically based, which I know sometimes can be a bad buzzword, but what that means in today's day and age is crafting a defense and offense that's going to provide you more success based off of current opportunities and based off of frequencies of what's going on. So that means, threes and rim shots offensively. It means defensively preventing those same shots. And we saw that in Brooklyn. He had, I think, top 5 each year of allowing the most mid-range shots as a defense. So they often funneled their defense based off of what the most inefficient shot on the court was. So we saw it kind of take what he's been saying in practice and apply it to how he's coached, which is what you want to see. And to your point, talking about Golden State, we talked a lot about Mike Brown learning from the Golden State kind of tutelage and taking that to Sacramento. He was never offensive coach, and all of a sudden, Sacramento is one of the best offenses. Now, maybe part to Jordi Fernandez, who's a great candidate, and some of the coaches he had there. We'll see how he does this year. But, that does matter, and Kenny kind of spoke about it with you in the interview, where he's been adaptable and be willing to change how he thinks for the betterment of his team and players, which is really important as a coach. As the game evolves, he's said in previous interviews, he's trying to stay ahead of the curve. So that's really important when we talk about what we take out of that. And I'll say one more thing. Mobley's development is the most important thing here. Yeah. The Cavs will get to where they want to get to if Mobley develops. If Garland gets back to where he was, they'll go far. They'll go farther if Mobley gets even better. And what we kind of have been calling for a long time is what you talked about with Draymond is use him as a playmaker. When people talk about what's Mobley's best skill, it's probably his passing for a big. His assist percentage was, think about 15.5, 15.9, which is the same range as Anthony Davis last year. That is his best skill set, using him more on the ball. And we heard JB talk in training camp last year about using my bigs more at the elbow, using him more as a playmaking hub. We really didn't see that too much. Not only does that get a shooter on the ball or a non-shooter on the ball, it gets your shooters off the ball and creates better gravity. So when we talk about a more free-flowing offense, being able to utilize your talent better, that is what you're hoping to see, and what he kind of talked about was certainly encouraging in that aspect.
I have one thing I need to say on Evan Mobley real quick. So I posted a little clip from the interview where I asked him, hey, do you see the requisite attributes in Evan and Jarrett that you saw in Al Horford and Brook Lopez that made you think they could become three-point shooters? And I got probably a dozen responses saying, what are you talking about? Mobley shot 37% from 3 last year. He's already a shooter. If you attempt 1.2 threes per game, you are not a three-point shooter, okay? Let's just call a spade a spade. Evan can develop into a three-point shooter. He has, once again, I think he has the touch and the ability and the range to take 3, 4, 5 a game. But if you're shooting 1 3-pointer a game, I don't care if it's 37% or 50%, you are not a three-point shooter. When teams are willing to leave you wide-ass open in the playoffs, you are not a three-point shooter. So I just want to get that out. I feel a lot better getting that off my chest. I wasn't going to respond to every troll on Twitter trying to tell me that Evan Mobley's already a shooter, because if that's the mindset you're under, then we have nothing to speak about. Like, that's the conversation we can't even have. But back to your initial point. Two things on Atkinson that I think will be crucial. A, who he fills out the rest of his staff with. I think in today's day and age of basketball, the head coach is a figurehead. But the rest of your staff is really who kind of runs the show, because the relationship between coaches and players now is more important than it has ever been in the past. He talked about it. Kenny talked about it. The way he was in Brooklyn with certain players, they kind of clashed and butted heads. And he's learned since then that you can't go in and treat your star players in certain ways because they'll just check out. And we saw it here in Cleveland last year. Some of the friction between JB and Donovan came from JB wanting to practice hard day in and day out, and the veterans being like, yeah, I'm not sure we really want to do that. So as a head coach, relationship and managing players and what their needs and wants are is, I would say, almost as important in today's day and age of basketball as the X's and O's of a scheme, which is where the rest of your staff comes into play. You have to hire and assemble a staff that, A, can teach your message. It still should be Kenny Atkinson's offense in a collaborative form with the rest of the guys on the staff. But the assistants have to be able to preach the way you want things to be run with the same language and the same details if Kenny Atkinson was walking each and every player through each and every position on each and every set. You need them to take care of that. You also need a guy who can run the defense or the offense, so when the head coach is trying to focus in on one thing to make some necessary in-game adjustments, the other end of the court isn't going completely unobserved. You have to have a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator. It depends on whatever situation we're talking about specifically, who can take the reins for a few minutes on the bench and call plays or call out defensive sets to counter what the offense is running. And I'm very curious to see who Kenny surrounds himself on the bench with, because he's worked with a ton of great coaches in the past. His connection throughout the NBA and coaching circles runs deep. And I don't think he's going to have a hard time attracting assistant coach candidates to Cleveland because of the situation the Cavs are in roster-wise and their ability to win. So I don't know if you have any leads yet on some of Kenny's potential assistants, but I'm fascinated, and I mean fascinated, to see who he brings on this staff to help round out from top to bottom the Cavs coaching staff for 2024, 2025.
So you kind of talked about it. In today's day and age where players have more leverage than ever, if you can't connect with your star player, you can't coach, period. That's why JB's not here anymore.
Yeah.
So it's important, and I hope that was something the Cavs thoroughly evaluated when they hired Kenny and doing their research, because Brooklyn didn't end well. There's a lot of different factors. We've lived and breathed Kyrie, so we know what that looks like. But it's still important. It's good that him and Donovan met. They have a good relationship from what it seems. Donovan signed off on him, so that's all important from day one. What I'll also say is that it's also important for coaches to find the right team at the right time, just like for any relationship. Sometimes it's the right time more than the right person.
Yep.
This team may not have been ready for Kenny's style previously, before Bickerstaff, before going all through the coaching struggles, before craving the scheme-related things that they wanted. And we started to hear in the Orlando series, in the Clippers game, at the end of the game, shenanigans that happened there. This team may not be ready for this when Bickerstaff first took over, but now I think they want and are ready to be coached. They want to go to the next level and understand what it takes. And we kind of heard Zach Lowe touch on his latest podcast with Jonathan Gavoni. Atkinson kind of learned in Golden State, you can play music at practice. You don't have to be go, 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 be out there on the court. You hear some of the previous players talk about Kenny Atkinson being a nut, out there practicing barefoot, shooting with the players, go up on defensive drills with the guys. You can take it easy. And to your point, with JB Bickerstaff, you don't have to be a grinder day in, day out. You have to know your team, know your role. And that's one of the assistant coaches in the NBA we talked to. You kind of mentioned Kenny's a grinder. That's just who he is. That's why he was successful as an NBA player. It's why he's successful as a coach to where he's at now. But I think we'll see from his Golden State time that hopefully he's been able to adapt and learn how to change his style. And we talk about coach. I think Jacques Vaughn would be an important assistant here. We've seen what you talked about, that kind of communicator on staff with JB, with Beeline, and Lou with Blatt. That communicator, your next head coach, is important. I shouldn't say next head coach. No leading into what could become, but that next coach is really important with that. Some of the guys keeping an eye on: Jordan Ott from the Lakers, Brett Bielemayer, who's with the Orlando Magic, actually got to start here in Cleveland and won a championship with them. Will Weaver, another former assistant coach. Those are all guys to kind of look at based off this past that could make sense.
One last thing on the Atkinson offense, then we're going to talk about the next domino to fall for the Cavs. he talked about pace, and every year he was in Brooklyn, they ran. They actually weren't that efficient in transition, which is kind of counterintuitive. You run a lot, you think you just would be up high in the rankings in terms of transition efficiency and scoring, but I think that was more of a result of the lack of finishers and quality players he had to work with in Brooklyn than any stylistic thing. He talked about playing the two bigs together, and for the sake of this point, let's assume Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are both back. The core four stays intact. He said part of the way you can play with two bigs and create space with two bigs is by running and not letting the defense get back and get set to run against or to run your offense against because they're dealing with guys down low. Let's push the pace, get out in transition, and then it doesn't matter if we have 4 non-shooters because we're playing transition basketball. So I do think in an ideal world, I wouldn't run it back with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley just because I believe spacing is too important in today's NBA. But I was at least encouraged. It was something I hadn't really thought about enough, and it was a bad omission on my part for not thinking about this earlier. Another way to create space with two bigs is get a rebound and run, and don't let the defense get set so that way there's more space to operate with anyway. So the fact he brought that up shows why he's an NBA coach, and we are sitting here on a podcast talking about his style and philosophy as opposed to being on the bench with him. We appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. We have one more topic here. Make sure you guys check out Real Cavs Fan Forum and Real Cavs Fan at Real Cavs Fan on Twitter. They post a bunch of great stats, and I'm telling you, the transcriptions of interviews they get from Windy and podcasts all around the country talking Cavs is can't miss stuff, and it's easy to keep informed and up to date with the Cavs when you don't have to go listen to 300 podcasts. They have guys like my man here who does it for you. We saw the Donovan extension. We've seen the Atkinson hire. If those are the only 2 dominoes this offseason for the Cavs, I feel like it would be very underwhelming. I don't think there's a giant domino to fall, but something has to happen next. And if it was up to you and your crystal ball of predictions, what is the next domino you think that will fall for the Cavs here?
So Isaac Okoro, that whole situation is the one to pay attention to. With his restricted free agency, his current cap hold is putting them right up against the first apron, which is important. We kind of talked about it financially. It's not that Dan won't pay. It's how restrictive that makes your team and how hard it is to improve. So that apron, that repeater tax, now that they're going to be a tax team probably this year, that's important to note. So with Okoro, depending what they do, that could shift them in a few different levels. So that's likely why you're seeing them play the market, understand what's out there, and his restricted free agency will likely determine kind of what flexibility they have. Detroit's really the only team that has cap space to acquire him, which coincidentally, they have someone that Isaac may know very well up there. So we'll see if they ultimately put together an offer that makes it hard for the Cavs to match. If they do, it gives them a little bit more flexibility. But even within that, not a lot of guys out in free agency currently that you probably want to spend on. So if you're looking at talent acquisition, you're probably looking at trade more than you are free agency.
I would love the Pistons to make some sort of Godfather offer to Isaac Okoro. Because Isaac could absolutely be a player on this team. I don't think it's like a debilitating loss if you lose Isaac, but mostly because if he goes to Detroit, they would literally be zagging against everything that's worked the last 10 years in the NBA. They could put out a lineup of Cade Cunningham, Isaac Okoro, Ron Holland, who they just drafted, who can't shoot, Jaden Ivey, who's a good young player but can't shoot, whatever Thompson brother they drafted last year who can't shoot, and all their bigs can't shoot. It would be the ultimate anti-shooting team, and I just want to laugh at that because I think it would be funny. If they bring him back, it's great. You'd rather have Isaac Okoro than not have him, but if he's the reason you start having to pay the luxury tax and then get the restrictions that come with the first apron, he's not someone I would die on that hill for, I guess is the best way I can put it. That will be the next domino. You're right. What I hope the next domino is finding a way, if possible, to improve the Karis LeVert minutes. I don't know how you feel, but as good as Karis can be at times, he is equally confusing and frustrating at others. And I just think with a bench that is as volatile as the Cavs is, I want one guy I can trust. Like one guy I know when he enters the game, I know exactly what I'm getting for better or worse. It's not the roller coaster of LeVert. It's not the roller coaster of Niang. It's not the injury roller coaster of Dean Wade. It's not the roller coaster of Sam Merrill. Craig Porter Jr. might be the most consistent bench player they currently have on the roster. And that's just not good enough in my opinion. So some sort of sign and trade to improve the LeVert position. And one guy I have in mind, And this is something I didn't think I would say a few days ago, but with seeing how the free agency market played out, I'm kind of interested if there's a way to flip LeVert in a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan. I know he's a free agent and it'd have to do some sort of work with Chicago, or if you trade LeVert and just bring DeRozan in as the guy to run your bench unit. I know he can't shoot. I know he's not a great fit because the spacing is a legitimate issue, but if he's willing to take a role like that, and there's a good chance he won't be, he's a guy that I would be very interested in the Cavs, at least taking a deep, hard look at, because I do think he could be the scoring focal point of your second unit. He's a guy who in the clutch we know has come through time and time again, even if he's not the primary clutch option for the Cavs with Donovan and Darius and those guys. But he's a guy, at least I like on paper, that if you could replace LeVert with DeRozan, I think that's a legitimate upgrade that would make the Cavs a more dangerous threat next season.
I think he'd probably say that for a lot of guys. But you kind of talk through it. They have quantity. What they need is quality. It was often hard in this playoff and last playoff to really find that fifth guy to share the floor and have consistent minutes with. So whether it be health or inconsistency or not being able to play both ends, finding consistent bench play and a consistent fifth or sixth guy is more important than adding another guy to that. Trying to unjam the 2-3 logjam that they have is critical. Strus, Okoro, LeVert, Tyson, Merrill, Mitchell, Garland, all those guys can get minutes at the 2. The problem is none of those guys can scale up enough to play the 4 or even the 3 consistently to where you can unclog that naturally. So utilizing some of those players to find someone else who can play your big wing or is a third big, that's what we're really looking for. Some of the wings that are probably going to be out there, DeAndre Hunter, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, those are the type of guys that you're likely looking at that hopefully you can swap out 1 or 2 of those wing players for to provide you some better balance between the guards and the bigs, but also positionally when you look at how they want to play the second unit, those guys are blocked by someone else because of their lack of positional versatility. So it even helps addition by subtraction from that regard.
Let's run through that list again. We'll start with Cam Johnson of the Nets. Nets are obviously in fire sale mode. I'm not sure what they take. The Nets want picks. They're not going to take back bad contracts, and I feel like if the Cavs put together their best package for Cam Johnson, a team like Oklahoma City or someone else could just completely blow them out the water in terms of what assets they have to offer. So I don't think he's a realistic option. Am I wrong in thinking that if they want to trade Cam Johnson, the Cavs can't put together the best package for him, right?
No.
Okay, who was next on the list? It was DeAndre Hunter, Cam Johnson. Who was the third name?
Dorian Finney-Smith.
They probably have enough for Dorian Finney-Smith if they really want. I'm not sure he moves the needle. DeAndre Hunter is the one I want to get to, who in a vacuum would be a great fit alongside the Cavs' current core 4 of Allen, Mobley, Mitchell, and Garland. A defensive 3-and-D wing who can shoot the 3. He lives up to the 3-and-D mantra. The Hawks do have a bunch of 3-and-D wings now. They drafted Zachary Risa-Shea with the first overall pick. Hunter has been injury prone. His contract, I know he signed that 4-year extension worth, I think, $95 million if the number's right, which is certainly palatable in today's day and age. With LeVert entering the final year of his deal, is there a world, in your opinion, where the Cavs can flip LeVert and something into DeAndre Hunter, or am I living in La La Land?
No, I think those are the type of situations that are probably going to be most advantageous for the Cavs. So teams that are looking to offload talent for financial concerns because their pathway is changing. So OKC is a perfect example of that, swapping Caruso for Giddey. That's the type of moves that the Cavs are likely looking to make. Nothing against Okoro, but does he align with your timeline, with where you're currently at? And we saw OKC say no with Giddey. We want someone who's better able to fit our roster and our timeline now because we want to win now. So it's nothing against Okoro, but is there a better fit out there for what you need? And we kind of saw with the starters here the last 2 years, Okoro was able to actually be more efficient with the starters. So last year with the core 4 plus Okoro, they were 96th percentile overall net-wise per 100 possessions. This year with Strus, they were in the 50s. Injuries and other things contributed to that. But I think when you look at trying to fill up that 5th starter spot, you want someone more like Okoro, who's low usage, better efficiency, is better point of attack than Strus, but hopefully can have some of the 3-point volume that Strus has that we kind of talked about earlier with the volume concerns of a whole host of other issues that we have. So that's the type of player you look at, and that's why, Hunter or Finney Smith or one of those guys may be a better fit because they have lower usage, better efficiency, but have some better size in the wing than what the current Cavs currently have.
I'm looking up DeAndre Hunter on Pro Basketball Reference real quick just to make sure I say this correctly, but he's listed at 6'8", 225. He certainly fits the mold of a big 3-and-D wing. He's been a solid NBA player for 5 seasons. He's averaged for his career 14.5 points a game. He shoots 45% from the floor, 36 from 3. He shot 39% this year on 5 attempts per game. He only takes 11 shots. His usage rate is exactly where you want it to be for a third or fourth offensive option. I mean, he's on paper the dream, like the dream fit. Now, would Atlanta, who just had the number 1 overall pick, they just traded DeJounte Murray. You have to surround Trae Young with 3-and-D wings because he's a defensive liability in his own right, and he's such a high usage point guard that having low usage guys around him is the only way to kind of counterbalance that. Would they trade a Hunter for LeVert? Could you do a sign and trade with Okoro and LeVert to get Hunter? That's possible under the new rules, right? Because Atlanta's not up under the tax apron, or not even close to that, I don't believe.
Yeah, you're probably looking at LeVert in the filler, like a Ty Jerome or Niang or Wade, or depending on what Okoro signs for, you could get him up high enough. Now, I don't think Atlanta's going to go for the hometown boy at that price, but you're probably looking at combining, something to get to that 22, 23 million that Hunter's making.
All right, well, that's my dream then. I'm going to go to bed tonight and go into PTO the next few days, hoping that there's a Okoro plus LeVert sign and trade for DeAndre Hunter. We're going to wrap it up here in a sec, but we always end with fan questions, and the people in the chat, shout out to the hundreds of people watching right now. We love you guys. We appreciate you guys. I answer a lot of the questions, and a lot of the questions are the same ones I get pretty frequently, so I'm going to give you a chance to answer some viewer questions here. If you have a question, drop it in the chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. The first one's not a question, but Smooth Rob says, "You're not bragging enough about our little real Cavs fan community, home of the best coverage Cavs fans can find." Once again, highly, highly, highly recommend checking them out online if you guys haven't seen it yet. Okay, first question from Chris Gillespie. "I wonder if the lack of Cavs moves, are they just okay with being average? And if they are, does that mean Dan Gilbert's heart isn't in it anymore?" What says you? What say you, real Cavs fan?
I don't think they're okay being average, and I don't think Donovan would have resigned if he was okay being average. As they move forward, we kind of talked about it earlier, there has to be an available move to make this team better with the core 4. We'll see what happens. I'm cautiously optimistic. Some of Kobe's best moves have been later in the summer. We talked about Laurie, sign and trade, talked about Donovan later in the summer. So those are the type of situations where once options dwindle down, because of where the Cavs are at financially and trade piece wise, they're in a position to be more opportunistic than like we talked about with Cam Johnson, where when you're going up against a bunch of different bidders, the Cavs probably don't have the type of assets to win a bidding war outright. So probably waiting to see where the market settles. Hopefully some of the suitors die down for some of the pieces that they're looking at and take advantage of that. But Donovan didn't resign to be average, and I don't think this team plans to be. But I think it also is their hope for internal development, keeping pace. Whether or not that's accurate, we'll see. But there certainly has to be some external help to bolster where this team is at, given the weaknesses we've seen the last 2 years.
Next one comes from DJ Brobot, who says, "Evan Mobley should not be shooting threes. Cavs have 90 guards who can shoot threes. Do you believe Evan Mobley needs to become at least semi-reliable three-point threat for the Cavs to take that next step forward?"
I'm glad he asked this because I had some stats I wanted to fire off before I got off here. So yes and no. Yes, I think ultimately Evan has to be your 5th best shooter on the floor. Or Allen be your 5th. Whoever that is, they have to be your 5th best shooter. If Mobley is your 4th best shooter or Allen's your 4th best shooter, I'm not sure how much that's going to benefit you spacing-wise. Because I think we have to be somewhat realistic about Kenny's ability to develop a three-point shooter, especially as big men. He kind of talked about it in your interview. 2 things they look at. One is free throw percentage. Typically, analytically looking at the draft, that's something that they can kind of look at and project of how realistically much better can they get. Mobley and Allen. Allen's about, I think, 71% career-wise. Mobley's about 68%. You look back at Brook Lopez and Al Horford. Horford's about 76%. Lopez is 79%. So already that touch may not be there to develop high-end skill. But additionally, he mentioned in an interview with you, Lopez and Horford already had those mid-range games developed. which is very important of taking the next step. So it's not just going from rim to three, it's going from mid-range to three and stepping back a little bit. Even like Channing Frye talked about it in his career. Brook Lopez looked up the stats, was about 20% in long mid-range shots, so between 14 feet and three-point range. He was about 20% before he made that leap to three-point range. Al Horford was closer to 40%. 40% of his shots were in that mid-range area. Mobley and Allen, Mobley's been about 5% of his shot attempts coming in that mid-range area. Allen, 4%. So not only were they not nearly the mid-range shooters that those two were, or even free throw-wise, it's hard to see them developing as quickly as those two had because they didn't have the prior requisites that those two had a blueprint for of how to extend your range. So I don't want to put a damper on that. Ultimately, that's going to determine how far this pairing goes, but I think we should be realistic to expect what's going to happen next year out of these two.
Yeah, he likes stats just as much as I do. That's why this is always fun talking Cavs, and Real Cavs Fan is a great forum. I'm going to just say one thing on the three-point shooting. Evan doesn't have to be Steph Curry. He doesn't have to be a 45% three-point shooter. They're not going to run sets for Evan Mobley coming off pin downs and backside doubles and floppies and whatever you want to call Kenny Atkinson's offensive system. He's not going to do that. He just can't be a guy you ignore completely on the three-point line to put an extra defender in the paint to clog up driving lanes for Darius and Donovan and whoever else is on the court. He has to be a reliable guy you can count on when Donovan gets in the paint and sees the help defender come crashing down. He just has to be good enough for Donovan to feel comfortable saying, let me pass it to Evan, and if he's wide ass open, he can make it three. We're not asking for him to become the second coming of Dirk Nowitzki. We are not begging, and the Cavs do not need, it'd be great if it happened, but they do not need Evan Mobley to shoot at the same clip that Karl-Anthony Towns shot. They just need him to be someone that defenses have to consider for a split second. Do I help or do I stay? And if they can get that, it will open up so much more for the drivers on this team. That's it. If they get better, beautiful, but they can't be zeros. And right now, despite the fact that Evan Mobley shot 37% from three last year, which does not matter, he shot 50-something threes. Or he shot in 50 games, he shot 1.3 threes per game. So he probably shot 79 threes on the season. That does not qualify you as a shooter.
Volume is important. We saw this on the team with Strus and Okoro. Okoro had a higher three-point percentage during the season, I think 39% versus Strus 35%. But Strus was the more impactful shooter because he could make more and take more shots. Teams are guarding Strus differently in the playoffs than Okoro because he could make 2, 3, 4, 5 shots. Okoro, if he makes 1 or 2 per game, they're willing to live with that in the scheme of how you defend someone. So volume is just as important, if not more, than three-point percentage. So if Mobley can hit, 5, 6 3-point attempts per 36 minutes and is shooting 33, 34%, that's going to be a lot better than him only shooting 1 or 2 at 39%. So volume is just as critical in this equation as percentages.
Bingo. Louis D says, can we do something with Darius's contract to get Lauri Markkanen back? The trade value and the trade market for Darius Garland right now is as low as it's been. You just saw what DeJounte Murray got traded for. That is pennies on the dollar for what the Hawks paid to get him from San Antonio. And I'm not sure the Cavs have anything that would interest Utah right now. As much fun and as great as it would be to get Lauri Markkanen back, Utah's in a rebuild. What are the Cavs giving up to Utah to pry away their top player and their best asset? They have no draft picks because Utah already has all their picks. And I don't think George Niang, Karis LeVert, and a Dean Wade package is going to give you enough for Utah to say bye-bye to Lauri. What say you?
No.
Okay. Easy money. Next up from Slick Sophistication, do we have a chance with Miles Bridges?
I think that's certainly something to watch, and they've been linked to Bridges before, and that's one of those restricted free agency kind of bargain bins that Koby has tended to dive in previously. So we'll see how Bridges' market develops, and if it doesn't, that could be one of those opportunities where as suitors dwindle, as cap space continues to be taken up, is that someone you can potentially get at a lower cost value than you would on the open market. So Michigan State guy too. We know Dan loves his MSU guys, but that is one that I would watch as far as how his free agency goes and kind of what becomes of the Cavs cap space situation with Okoro.
He obviously has a checkered past, but from a basketball standpoint would be a very nice fit with what the Cavs want to do offensively, or what we expect them to want to do offensively next year under Kenny Atkinson. And I agree with you that he might not be a guy that flies off the market. We've already seen a bunch of small forwards and wings get picked up, and as more and more of these teams kind of fill up, he could be a guy who has the potential and talent to get a big, big payday down the road, but needs a little bit of a reclamation. And I think you could get him on a 1-year cheap deal in 2-3 weeks that may turn out to be one of the quote unquote steals of the offseason if he can keep his off the court behavior under control, I guess, maybe the right way to say it. Adam Holland says, is Jared Allen for Herb Jones realistic? I don't think they would do that from a New Orleans standpoint. They want to trade Ingram, not Herb Jones or Trey Murphy. But I'm curious to what you say. Is Herb Jones for Jared Allen a realistic 1-for-1 potential trade? Assuming the money matches, I don't know what Herb Jones makes.
Yeah, so the Pelicans would have to throw in some money because I think Herb's at about 12, 13 million and Allen's about 20 million. So there had to be some pieces. That's one of the hard things about the Pelicans right now is that after Dyson Daniels and some Larry Nance went away, really all their salaries are larger salaries that are pretty impactful players. So trying to combine those, it gets a little bit tricky with how that works. We've kind of heard New Orleans is a target for Jared Allen for a while. That's the one team that makes the most sense if Allen is going anywhere. Not only does he fit with them, but also they have the type of wing talent the Cavs want. We had heard prior in the season last year that there were some discussions for Herb Jones, didn't really go anywhere at the time. Whether that picks back up now, we've also heard some Pelican folks that Herb is off the table, that he's someone that they really want to keep and they're focusing, like you said, on Ingram. So we'll see how that goes. And we know Koby likes his 3-way deals as well. So perhaps even if they're not getting Herb Jones, is it J.A. going to the Pelicans and a third team getting the Cavs additional assets? So certainly someone that would fit in well, I think more so with the guards than it would the big, but certainly someone who fits kind of a lot we talked about with the low usage, high efficiency, can hit some threes, and ultimately is a good point of attack defender.
I saw reports that Sacramento was interested in Brandon Ingram, which never made sense to me from the start. So I threw together a 3-team trade on today's show just for fun. And it ended up getting Ingram to the Kings, Allen and Niang to the Pelicans, and then the Cavs got Keegan Murray a first and Kevin Huerter back. And I'm all for you keep your really good players unless the trade makes perfect sense. And I'm not going to trade Jared Allen or Darius Garland or Mobley or Mitchell for quarters on the dollar. But if you get Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter back for Jared Allen, that is a wing upgrade galore for Cleveland. So if that was the scenario, I would. And you mentioned the 3-team trade, so I want to throw that out there. But I don't know why Sacramento's interested in Brandon Ingram, to be totally honest. So that was just a little speculation.
I think, no, they definitely are. From talking to some Pelican folks, the Kings and Pelicans keep in contact almost as much as the Cavs and Pelicans do. So I certainly think that fits. And we've heard kind of the Kings dabble in some of the larger name players. I think they are trying to take advantage of the window they have, especially with De'Aaron Fox's extension. Not sure where that goes. They want to improve they're trying to keep pace in the West. So their internal improvement that they bet on this year didn't pay off like they wanted to. So now they're trying to go out extra and try to find someone. That's why you've seen them linked to Levine. Probably why they're going to get more aggressive with Ingram, depending on where things go. But certainly interesting to watch.
So who says no in that 3-team trade then? Pelicans get Allen Niang, Kings get Ingram, Cavs get Keegan Murray, Kevin Huerter, and a protected first.
Probably the Kings, but if they're willing, I got United Miles that I will pay for Allen's flight to Sacramento if that's what it takes. I mean, if that's what you're getting back, that's an absolute no-brainer. Someone like Keegan Murray who will fit seamlessly as a high-end wing player, has the age, has the size, has the skill set. If that's on the table, automatic.
Yeah, we're on the same page. Last one, then we will wrap here. This is from Ian, who says, Laurie's on the Jazz. Danny Ainge runs the team. He's fleeced the Cavs twice. If the Cavs front office ever sees his name show up on the phone again, they just shouldn't answer it. There's no question, but I felt like it was an appropriate comment after the Laurie marketing discussion earlier. So, once again, appreciate Real Cavs fans for joining us. You want to plug how people out there can find what you guys do and tell the people where to find you on socials and all that before we wrap up here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Definitely find us on Twitter. Try to interact with you guys as much as we can. Find us on realcavsfans.com. We'll have content up there as well as the forums. You can chat with other Cavs fans who want to chop it up just as much as you can. So feel free to reach out. Happy to have you. And make sure you also follow the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show too.
I appreciate it. It's been weird. I know your real name, but you wanted to go by Real Cavs Fans. And I had to stop myself like 38 times from calling you what your real name is, and I respect.
We gotta rep the brand. Gotta rep the brand.
The brand loyalty, but appreciate you joining on the show today on the Ultimate Cavs Show. We usually go 35 minutes. We went 55, which means we had a lot to cover and a lot of great conversations. We appreciate the people who tuned in tonight. This was a crossover, a long time in the making. Make sure you check out all the good folks over at realcavsfans.com. Follow them on Twitter. I retweet their stuff all the time. So if you can't remember Real Cavs Fans, just go to my timeline and you will see some stuff there. I appreciate you joining me today, my friend, and this is not the last time we will see you on the Ultimate Cavaliers Show.
Have a happy 4th.
You guys too. We'll see you guys tomorrow on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. I'm actually off all week, so I'll see you on Monday. But Earl, G, Bull, Tyvis, and Ant are there tomorrow. Peace.